We have a super special guest today. I can't even tell you how honored I am to have my new friend Robert Margouleff here next to me. And I'm going to read you a little bit of biography about some of the amazing things that he's done in his life. Robert is a Grammy Award-winning engineer, producer, early synthesizer pioneer, studio owner, filmmaker. He's most noted for his work during Stevie Wonder's classic period, which includes Music of My Mind, Talking Book, Inner Visions, Phillinganes' First Finale, and his work producing the hit album with T.O.N.T.O, Freedom of Choice, and the song Whip It. That's already more than most of us could dream of. He was an in-demand producer for many others, including the Isley Brothers, Billy Preston, Jeff Beck, Weather Report, Depeche Mode, David Sanborn. That's just naming a few. There's a lot more. He's played a major role in bringing synthesizers to the forefront of popular music, so my heart is very close to that. And he had a lot to do with my inspiration for wanting to do this and push the envelope on the technology and the use in music, because it's all very musical. In his early career, he pioneered the development of electronic music. After partnering with jazz bassist and engineer Malcolm Cecil, they created the mega synth known as T.O.N.T.O, which a lot of people know about, and that stands for, not everyone knows this, the original Neo-Timbral Orchestra, which utilized cutting-edge instruments from the likes of Moog, Arp, Oberheim, and others. So the partnership with Malcolm led to a recording deal for T.O.N.T.O's expanding headband, and that was an album they made, Zero Time, which was released on Embryo Records. And his last venture, because Robert's done a lot of things, Mikasa Multimedia, was the biggest mixing stage for blockbuster films, creating surround mixes for streaming and home theater. And now Robert has just finished his book, Standing on the Edge, which is a memoir, a look backward and a look into the future. And we're here to take all those looks. We want to look backward and into the future. And of course, we're in the present right now. And there's a lot to talk about.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Thank you. I'm really blessed to have you here.
What a toy store you have here, I must say.
Well, I was inspired by T.O.N.T.O, and I kind of wanted to create my own T.O.N.T.O, which to me meant a musical instrument. It's one musical instrument, and I kind of am able to use it in that way. So I was really inspired by what you and Malcolm did. So that leads me to one of the questions I've always wanted to ask you, like, why did you buy a Moog synthesizer? Because when you did, it wasn't a very well-known thing, and you had one of the very first ones from Bob Moog. So what was going on in your head?
Well, it was during the time I was producing the first above-ground, underground movie with Andy Warhol's first superstar, Edie Sedgwick. And the film was called Ciao Manhattan. It was something I thought, wow, what Andy's doing at the factory is very interesting, but it's all done with kind of news-gathering equipment and very sort of hit or miss. And I thought that the idea of creating the first above-ground, underground movie would be an interesting thing for everyone to see.
Sure.
And it would also give the public a view, of bringing these kids, and they were kids, I was a kid too during that time, to bring the underground to the above ground so that they could be more accessible to an audience. And also, I was paying moolah. I mean, Andy never paid anybody for anything. And I had enough of a budget that when I started out, we could everyone could have a chunk of the pie and work and focus on making a movie. And that's what happened. And what happened was, one night I was in my haunting days patrolling the East Village, and I ended up at a funny club called Cerebrum. And inside in the booth, there was pieces of a Moog synthesizer sitting on the floor under the DJ's booth. And they turned it on in between sets and stuff. And when I heard it, I suddenly realized that I'd found a voice as a musician.
Wow.
And I loved the sound of it. And the next thing I did, I said, this is the way to score Ciao Manhattan, to score a movie with it all self-made by the artists themselves, no interlocutors, no scientists, no guys with pencil protectors and deal makers, shine with me, kid, I'll make you as famous as the Beatles. It was none of that. It was just everyone was directly connected to the art. And so I saw the synthesizer and I said, this is a way that I could really make music for the movie. It would have been the first fully electronic score. Unfortunately, it didn't end up that way because I sort of ran out of gas after a year and a half and $130,000 in debt. But nonetheless, I called Bob Moog on the phone and met him, and I bought a Series 3 just like this.
Yeah, it's a series. It's a 3C, Roman numeral 3C, which means cabinet. It's the beautiful walnut cabinet.
Yes. And lo and behold, a few days later, after talking to him on the phone, Walter Sear and Tom Fly from a band called Lothar and the Hand People. Lothar was a theremin, okay? So it was Lothar and the Hand People. They were interested in electronic music. And they brought my synthesizer to me on the 47th Street in the studio. And once I touched it, I never looked back. I really felt that was... I left the film world behind as a cinematographer and emerged into the world of music. And I spent a long time learning how to play it. Me and Tom Fly from Lothar and a guy named Gino Pizzerchio, who was a brilliant musician who came with the tribe from the factory. And once I started playing the synthesizer, I ran directly into the arms of electronica, and I've never looked back.
And this is, we're talking, what, 1967?
67, yeah, beginning of 60, end of 67, early 68.
I mean, that's probably one of the very first ones that Bob Moog ever churned out that was like a
finished
finished product.
He'd come down from Trumansburg because the keyboards would never hold pitch. If you played like a long sustain note for like a minute or something, the C keyboard would slowly start pitching down, down, down. And it was hard to keep, even to this day, this instrument in particular, very hard to keep in tune, very temperature sensitive. And the best way to do that is to leave it on for a day before you decide to use it, so it sort of has a chance to cook in.
And did you ever like update it along the way?
We did. We did something very special.
Bob, thank you for having so much to do with bringing synthesizers to the world. Thank you for T.O.N.T.O and all the things that you brought in. Thank you for making Devo sound like we did on Freedom of Choice and Whip It. We couldn't have done it without you.
After I met Malcolm, who is a superb technician, I might add, as well as an ace bass player, when we built T.O.N.T.O, it was not T.O.N.T.O at first. It was a whole bunch of synthesizers.
Well, wait a second. How did you, because you built it with Malcolm, right?
Yes.
So how did you meet, so you have this synthesizer.
Yeah, I was learning, I had a big learning curve, and I was in residence at a studio called Broadway Recording Studios. And they had a big deal there. It was a 12-track Scully tape recorder. That was the tracks that you had to work with.
12-track, was that 1-inch?
It was 2-inch.
2-inch 12, so that's a beautiful sound.
Yeah, it was a beautiful sound, but very limited. No, it was a 1-inch machine, I'm sorry.
The 8-tracks were 1-inch. I wasn't sure about the 12s.
Well, the 12 was a 4 more electronics with an extended head stack. Scully had that.
Yeah. Okay. I worked on an 8-track Scully in the first Moog studio that I ever worked at USC.
I used to love those Scullys. The head gate, always when you let the head gate up, it would come up nice and slow. And Ham Brocious, who was the Scully salesman, he would always say, "Look at that head gate. It's just like a ball bearing going through mayonnaise." And I never quite forgot that.
Fine pieces.
It was a nice machine.
It was machinery, moving parts.
It was moving parts, yeah. T.O.N.T.O is not a machine. T.O.N.T.O is a device. There's no moving parts, and there's nothing mechanical other than the keys in T.O.N.T.O. But
well, to me, they're instruments, because that's how my perspective on them is as an instrument. I don't really care about anything else.
Well, I learned really that and a lot of hash and pot, and I was up there at Broadway recording, and I was beginning to do sessions with Richie Havens and with Tito Puente and a whole bunch of people who were using that studio.
Using the Moog?
Yes, a bit. Just a bit. And then I got an offer to move to Media Sound. And Media was the soup to nuts. Studio was on 57th Street. It was 3 studios, a full mastering facility with 2 cutting lathes. And it was running full blast, doing commercials during the day and just beginning to do music at night. And it was in an old church on 57th Street. And it had this beautiful church proper of the A studio with the peaked roof.
Oh, with the reverb.
And it was just beautiful. I used to pull the synthesizer out on a gurney. It was about this size, and then 2 or 3 more tables and stuff, and it was like draped in wires and stuff. But I had ear level monitors, which is something I really advocate to this day.
Yeah.
To either side, and I would work and compose in the studio like that. And it was at that studio that I met Malcolm.
How? You just fell in?
Well,
How'd it happen?
Malcolm was a very eccentric guy, beautifully eccentric. He was a very first-class technician, and he was hired by the studio a few months before I got there, or a little bit after, and he was hired as the chief engineer of the studio.
No kidding, but he's a fine bass player.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
he's a musician.
He used to play with
and he-
Blaney Hall all the time, even when we were working together at Media. Media, they got it. The owners of Media, the guys who actually funded Media Sound, were the funders behind Woodstock. And so the studio was sort of very permissive. And they realized I had become sort of like the studio's bad boy and the crazy person slightly. I was a U-boat captain to them. They were a lot of the engineers. Tony Bon Jovi started at Media, who became a very sort of major engineer. But I wore gold lame vests and had hair down to my shoulders, and Malcolm Bushy had a hair. He looked like a big Q-tip.
So you just met Malcolm, and then what happened? How did you decided you wanted to do something together?
I had written a song called Aurora, and it was 27 minutes long. It was very abstract, and it had a little bit about what we were talking about the other night, of the beating sounds coming together, about how sometimes imperfection is a better choice, and in making music and selecting sounds. And Malcolm saw the synthesizer, and I saw this console in Studio A, which I could never fully understand, because it was all built on a top plate that was bending in the middle. It was looking down. The studio had so much underneath of it. Studios at that time were building their own consoles, because there were no like store-bought consoles. Every recording studio worth its salt, they built their own their own console. So what happened was it was a nest of wiring like you wouldn't believe underneath the top plate. It was one plate, like you lift it up like a piano lid, and you look underneath, and there's a mass of wire. And I said to him, Malcolm, you show me how to operate this board, and I'll show you how to play the synthesizer.
Okay, there you go.
And we shook hands that night, and I played Aurora for him in all its imperfect glory, 27 minutes long. And I said, Malky, I'm not even sure this is music. And he said, it's music, all right. It just needs a judicious edit, in his clipped English voice. It turned out to be 7.5 minutes long from 27 minutes. So it was very judicious editing, you might say. And we sort of fell in with each other. And at night, there weren't so many music clients, so I pretty had run of the studio. If I wasn't doing a Crazy Daisy toilet paper commercial, I could do my own music.
And you were doing work like that on the Moog?
Yeah.
That's some of the earliest Moog work I've ever heard of.
Yeah, we're doing, what's that one with the battery? Bum, bum, bum.
Duracell?
Duracell. Yeah, it was a Duracell commercial. So we were working away doing stuff during the day, and I was making a living programming for the agencies, basically.
Wow, that's like, I did that kind of stuff, but you were doing it so early.
Yeah, I think you must have been a teenager when I was doing that.
Well, yeah. And
that's 1971.
I wasn't even a teenager yet, almost.
But what happened was that Malcolm and I decided, we started talking about what was wrong with the synthesizer, how it could be better. There was a Cuban Chinese restaurant across the street that had paper tablecloths. And we'd go over there at 7 o'clock at night, and we'd have dinner. The waiter knew us. The food was terrible. It was filled with monosodium glutamate, to make it taste good. And I always ended up with a slight headache and feeling very flushed after every meal. But
you kept going back.
Yeah, it was that. But we had a big felt marker, and we planned Tonto on the tablecloth. Across the street.
You thought there were things wrong with the synthesizer, but you were going to buy more of them and put them together.
Yeah, we wanted to have a multi-voice instrument. We wanted to have an orchestra. And we wanted to be able to play it in public.
What a dream. It really was a dream. It started with that.
Yeah, it started with that, with all the synthesizers and separate tables and everything wired together.
But all on paper with, you're just marking it out in a Chinese. So T.O.N.T.O started on, like, with markers, paper, in a Chinese restaurant loaded with monosodium glutamate.
Yes. That's how it began.
That's something I didn't know.
But
that, to me, it's a dream. And that's how, like...
It was a vision.
And you followed through with it, though, because a lot of us have visions, and then they go away.
Yeah, and it was a vision. We didn't even know what tomorrow would bring. We were really living in the now.
But that's expensive, though. How do you...
Well, every penny we made, we put into the synthesizer. The problems we were facing were myriad. One thing was, there was a radio station down the street, and the synthesizer was sensitive to the RF. And we had to deal with those kinds of issues. And then, of course, the temperature issues.
Yeah.
It was temperature, the Moog changes once again. It never stays the same. But that kind of spontaneity, when you got a sound, you had to do it because it wasn't going to be there in a few minutes.
No.
So
well, you have to make it.
When we built T.O.N.T.O, we didn't actually build T.O.N.T.O at Media. We met Stevie at Media. Our album came out.
But this is way jumping ahead. I mean, you haven't even built T.O.N.T.O yet. I want to follow this in a lot of detail.
Okay.
So you started building T.O.N.T.O,
right.
And you just had Moogs, and like, when did you start to say, like, well, let's try an ARP, and like what?
Well,
what was
the next
thinking?
one was a guy named Serge.
Oh, so you had a Surge system.
Yeah, you met Serge. We were I bought another whole bunch of Moog parts and pieces and stuff, and it got to a place where it was like totally unwieldy.
But did you look at them as different, like capable of different colors? Like Surge versus ARP versus Moog versus
We liked all the
Oberheim?
different sounds that we were hearing. There weren't many portable synthesizers around at this time. I mean, it was the Moog or nothing, really, basically. And then David Friend at ARP showed up, and we saw the ARPs. But that didn't come until much later. What happened was at Media, we started working together at night, and we started making our first album, which we ended up calling Zero Time, T.O.N.T.O's Expanding Headband.
So you made an album together on the synths that you had?
Yes.
The earliest version of T.O.N.T.O.
I can remember trudging home. I was living at the Ansonia Hotel, which was on 74th Street. I can remember, like, at 4 in the morning, it's snowing, and I'm walking home from the studio at 4 in the morning, trudging through the snow. It's very quiet, very beautiful time. Mm-hmm. I can remember doing that night after night, going home and thinking about what we were doing. And I had a pair of Altec Lansing A7s, speakers in my living room at the Ansonia, and a 2-track Ampex 440. And I'd bring tapes home with me, and I'd listen to them. And we worked like that for the better part of a year and a half. And the album, we finished it. We were close to getting finished. And we were in the studio, in Studio A, working. And who walks into the room but Herbie Mann, the jazz flautist. And he said to Malcolm, "What are you doing here?" And Malcolm says, "Well, I work here now."
He knew him from the jazz world.
And Herbie said, "I remember you from Ronnie Scott's. What are you doing here?"
Ronnie Scott's is a jazz club in London. Very famous
jazz club.
And Malcolm was in the house band.
Yeah. Malcolm was in the house band at Ronnie Scott's, and the house band would play for any jazz musician who had come over from the States and couldn't afford to travel with the band, so the house band would back up various people who would come and play. And Herbie knew Malcolm from that time.
Okay. So what are you doing here?
What are you doing here? And Malcolm says, I know you as a bass player. What are you doing with that? And he pointed to the synthesizer. And Malcolm said to him, "Don't knock it until you hear it." And then Herbie left the room and went downstairs to Studio B, where he was producing a band. In the meantime, I pulled the synthesizer out into the room, put the spotlights down on it with the big speakers.
Yeah.
And he came back up, and the room was dark, just that synthesizer. And at high level, we played back Aurora. And he was blown away, and he said, "Listen, I have 3 acts signed to my label. I want you to be the 4th label. Here's a $5,000 advance." That's the first advance I ever got, other than getting paid, as an engineer or as a programmer.
I just want to take a quick minute to ask you to visit AnthonyMarinelliMusic.com, where you can sign up for a mailing list and receive exclusive free content. If you like what you're seeing in this video, there's lots more there for you. So back to the video. Hope you're enjoying it.
And we made that album Zero Time. And what happened, flashing forward a bit, is Stevie Wonder heard that record.
Oh, well, that's what I wanted to know. But so he heard the record and then you caught his ear.
Then it was Memorial Day weekend, 1971. The studio was closed. We were up in Malcolm's apartment, which was diagonally upstairs on the second floor over a delicatessen, which was immediately next door to the front door of media. And the studio was closed. The door was locked. And we hear, "Malcolm, Malcolm." And then we look out the window, and there's this guy, Ronnie Blanco, a fellow bass player of Malcolm's, standing there with this big, tall black guy with our album under his arm. I could see it out the window. And he says, "I got this guy here who wants to hear Tonto." And that's how it began. Then we moved to Electric Lady about a year later.
That was Stevie's
That was Stevie.
He came to you.
Yes. I can remember him. He came in, we were fooling around with Felix Pappalardi's Mellotron in Malcolm's living room. Malcolm was changing the tapes. And we started fooling around, and Malcolm picked up the bass and started plucking around with the bass. And one thing led to another, and suddenly we were downstairs in Studio B where he moved Tonto, and Stevie came in, and we showed him the instrument. He put his hands all over it and everything, and we explained it to him, and he really kind of checked it out with his hands and everything. And then he started trying to play chords on it. He said, "Malcolm, Bob, what's wrong with this instrument? It only plays one note at a time." And Malcolm said, "Stevie, it's sort of like a trumpet or a saxophone. You have to use your whole body just to get the mood and the sound, and it only plays one note at a time, and it comes out of your mouth." And he said, the synthesizer is more like an instrument like that, like a wind instrument would be.
That's a great description.
Yeah, it really worked. And Stevie got it in a second. And we started recording that weekend. We recorded like 15 or 16 songs.
Whoa, that weekend?
That weekend, we went completely bonkers.
That's crazy. So you guys were pushing, trying to find a new sound, and you had gotten it to this point, and then you did. And you made your own album, and then it got to the world, and it got to Stevie, who was at a time, I know, where he was looking to test what he had in his imagination and come into his own.
Yeah, he was sick of Motown. Why? Because there was a formula for Motown. It had four dancing guys in sort of uniforms and a front person, male or female. It was a formula. And Stevie didn't want to be inside the formula. It was him, and also his music was so socially significant and important. And it wasn't just about doo-bop and How I Love You, Baby. It was about
what was in him, but it wasn't out there yet.
Yeah. It was him and Marvin Gaye who really were writing the first black socially relevant music. But I didn't realize it then how close I was to him and that sort of philosophy, life philosophy. And we just started working together that weekend. That was just crazy. And then we just started recording. We never recorded to create an album, so to speak.
No.
We just recorded music, and we had a huge library of music, all in different kind of places. Some needed background vocals, some things we wanted to put this kind of sound on.
So there was no deal, there was nothing.
No
it was
deal.
Pure, completely creativity.
Stevie was finally out of his deal. He wanted to be his own person, and he wanted to be much closer to the music, not have some arranger at Motown arrange a song that he played on the piano and then come in and sing on it. Those days were over for Steve. And he really wanted to be his own person, and Malcolm and I really sort of acted as a channel for that. And we programmed and recorded it and mixed.
Well, I have to know, what was the sequencing like?
Sir Robert, when I first saw your name along with Malcolm Cecil's on the Wonder records of the early 70s, I realized then that you three were on the verge of something incredibly special and unique. And you helped Stevie forge a new sound that would create a new path for hundreds of other artists to follow. I just wanted to thank you for that. because it was incredible to hear your work and the results of your labor, and your inspiration and your influence that you had on Stevie is undeniable. And it's filtered down to so many other artists and musicians, myself included. So thank you again. I love you madly. I never thought that I even get to know you after listening to those records when I was a kid, but I do. I'm proud to know you, and I wish you all the best, and I love you madly.
Was it, I have a song, or I have an idea, or here's a bass part, or here's a, like, because if it's all going to happen with one at a time, one instrument at a time, because you weren't tracking everything the way
No, he
things
did come
were.
in with some fragments. Some songs he had in his head for 10 years, but he didn't want to have them published by Motown.
But what went down first? The vocal?
Sometimes,
The bass?
most of the time, it was piano or Rhodes.
So you had was it a guide track, or was it?
Basically a guide track. Sometimes a keeper, because
Okay.
sometimes the most impulsive ones are the best ones.
Yeah.
And Malcolm,
definitely.
Stevie, and I spent about a year in the studio, maybe a little bit longer, and we recorded daily. And it got to be a real trial at media, because the Cufflinks had to come in to do their toilet paper commercial and this toothpaste commercial, and then I had to go do a Ford Torino commercial, and then there was a Trans-Caribbean Airways commercial. And Malcolm was busy taking care of the studio, which was growing by leaps and bounds.
Oh, yeah.
We had our first 16-track machine in the basement. It was an Ampex MM1000. And we moved the synthesizer to the basement, and we plugged every instrument in that Stevie was going to use.
Oh,
the drums,
so that you could have
the
that
Rhodes.
dedicated.
Yeah, we had a dedicated setup, and Steve could move from one instrument to another. And we tried to be sensitive to his needs and not put a microphone boom at a place where he could run into it with his head and clobber himself.
Oh, well, yeah.
So we made the place as friendly and as warm as possible. We always had a two-way mic system, not with the pedal on the console say, Steve, start at letter A. It wasn't that. We had always an open mic in the studio, in the control room in the studio.
You could just talk to each other.
Yeah. The
But you had
window
glass then, so
yeah,
there
we
was.
had glass there, but most of the instruments didn't need glass. If we had the piano or the drums.
But you had it in
yeah.
case.
But basically, the studio window for us disappeared.
Yeah.
We were always in touch with one another in the studio.
But when you guys were doing this, when you're doing commercials and Malcolm is like doing studio maintenance or whatever, is Stevie just hanging around waiting for you guys?
Yeah, we would start at 7 o'clock at night. And,
Oh, so you did your day job and then every
and
night.
Malcolm had a crew of about 8 people. It was three full-on recording studios and 2 full-on mastering rooms, and
Wow,
a tape duplicating setup. All of that needed maintenance. With analog equipment, as you know, being the collector that you are, the minute you turn it on, it starts breaking. I mean, you can turn any analog piece of gear on, and it'll break the minute you turn it on. It's starting constantly failing. So it's a lot of maintenance to keep all that stuff running, and a lot of heat, and a lot of power cords, and a lot of AC and air conditioning, and everything to keep the place stable and possible for human habitation. And so we had a lot going on. But with Steve, we just got busier and busier and busier. And finally, it got to a place that we couldn't keep the setup. It would take me 4 hours to set up the drums, for example.
Yeah.
We couldn't do it because the Cufflinks were coming in to do a television commercial the next morning, and the room had to be broken down every day. And it finally got to a place where it became unbearable. And we wanted to keep things up. We didn't have any memory in our computer or for doing a mix.
Nothing.
How do you leave? Don't touch that knob. Do not touch upon pain of death.
We used to take
masking tape across the console.
Masking tape,
Don't
Polaroids.
touch
Did you
anything.
take Polaroid photos of the?
Yeah,
we used to
photos.
do that.
Write this down.
Yeah.
We were doing all of that kind of stuff, and it finally got to a place where it was really crazy. And then finally, Malcolm had to stop working as a maintenance engineer, and I had to stop working.
But then you have no job.
We didn't have a job. When Stevie, he gave us enough cake to keep the wheels turning.
So he was taking care of you a little
Yes,
bit.
yes, he was. A little to start with, but then we worked out a system to do it, and he took care of us, and we took care of him. And in the mornings, I'd get up around 9:30 or 10 or 11, and we'd make logs of what we had done. We kept Malcolm tried to keep a 7.5 IPS stereo running all the time when Steve was in the studio. Because when we were setting up, he'd be sitting noodling at the piano writing a song.
Oh,
so we had that going all the time. And it just got to be over the top. And then we had a big change. And that big change happened when we moved to Electric Lady.
Why did you move? I mean, did you get a deal or something?
We got a deal there, and it was when Jimmy had just passed, sadly. And he built that studio primarily as a home studio for him to do his own work. And it was really a very elegant home studio.
With Eddie Kramer? Did they do
Eddie
that?
Kramer, Jim Marin was the manager, and Eddie was chief engineer. And we went down there, and the minute we walked into the place, I knew this is where we needed to be.
Oh, so you moved, so you had a deal. So all that work, those were like demos, essentially, what you had been doing.
Well,
right?
Nothing was really mixed when we went to by the time we got to the Lady, we had a huge library of material, no mixing.
How many songs?
30 or 40, maybe
that's
more.
huge.
I don't know. A lot.
Hey, Bob. It's Steve Porcaro from the band Toto. I just want to thank you for all of the inspiration, all of the amazing music, showing us all where the bar was, and just in general, up in the state of the art, and showing people what synths could do, and showing us, the people who came after you, what synths can do, and inspiring us for as much and for as long as you have and continue to do. Thanks.
But that studio was built by a guy by the name of John Storick.
Oh,
John Storick.
He's related to Record Plant.
Yeah, well, yes, indeed. He's more than that. He just finished building the new studios out here for Spotify 50 years later. Oh. And turned out for years I represented John's interests on the West Coast. And I'm friends with him to this day. As a matter of fact, his daughter's my goddaughter.
Beautiful.
And he was the one who came down and saw us doing this thing, and we were talking about trying to figure out how we could play all these instruments together. And he said, I'm going to help you. And, he's a student of Gaudi and a sort of that kind of friendly atmosphere, very warm. The windows were all round. There was no hard surfaces. Everything was smooth.
That's a Spanish architect.
Yeah. But he was very influenced by that school of architecture.
Yeah.
And he built and designed Electric Lady for Jimi Hendrix. And one night he came into the studio and we started talking, and he is the one who came up with the cases that you now call Tonto.
And did you have the run of Electric Lady?
Yes.
Oh, so with the deal, you could set up, basically.
And stay set up.
And that's why you could build the cases. You could make it like, cabinets, and it's not moving. You're not like putting it in road cases.
He had a designer in Woodstock, and we came down and we stood in the middle, and we knew how we wanted to work, whereby we could turn our backs on each other to do programming, but then the keyboards, we were facing each other.
Yeah.
And 2 and 3 people could play the instrument at the same time.
So important. It became one. And you realized that it wasn't a one-person thing.
In my book, you can see the actual first physical drawings of Tonto's design of the cases.
Oh, we'll have
standing on the edge.
Maybe we can get some images to show on this interview.
Yes, you can. We have plenty of images.
We'd love to see that, the early designs.
But that instrument, we played one concert with the old Tonto, the first one, when we were at Electric Lady. Stevie went on the road, and we spent like 3 weeks programming the thing to play live in a cathedral in Wall Street. And we went down there. It was a rainy afternoon. It was lightning flashing, and it was kind of rainy. And we played an late afternoon concert in this. I think it was St. Thomas is the name of the church. Mm-hmm. It's a big cathedral kind of space. And it was lightning, and you could see the lightning blinking the stained glass windows and stuff. It was kind of curious and creepy and dangerous all at the same time. I didn't know what the hell would happen, but when we started playing, Tonto, of course, doesn't like being moved, much less being set up. Even if we brought it with all the wires wrapped around it, it was like a huge corpse on a roller, right, on a roll-in, right? We brought our monitors and some Alltech monitors and a little tiny console and stuff. and we set up. And of course, the T.O.N.T.O went completely bonkers.
No
And
computer.
Forget about trying to play anything that had 8 bars in it, right? Malcolm was in his glory, and I was in my total panic. And we ended up, though, playing totally abstract stuff like, what's her name today plays the Moog? We talked about
Suzanne Ciani.
Yeah, Ciani. We sort of ended up with a kind of Ciani kind of approach, but people loved it.
Well, Suzanne, I think, is the best live performer on
She's
synthesizer.
Incomparable, yeah.
Because
and she
it's
sort of
not
left the keyboard
pre-recorded.
behind.
So, but I know Sooner said that you finally, the Moog had a home and you didn't put it in road cases and then you dragged it out of there and
No, we dragged it out, covered it in moving blankets. And
wow, and took a chance.
so we realized
who
then
heard-
that we really needed to make a change.
But why are you doing a live performance? I mean, you're at Electric
Well-
Ladyland making an album with Stevie Wonder and then you just like, we're going to go play live?
Yeah,
Why?
why not?
In the middle of all of
Well,
this.
he's out on the road. What do we have
Okay,
to
so
do with
Stevie
ourselves?
was gone.
Yeah, so we got into trouble, of course.
See, okay.
When John came in and introduced himself in the control minute session, we hit it off immediately.
This is John Stork.
John Stork, and he helped us conceive we told him what we wanted, how we wanted to play, and we figured if we were in a circle, we'd never have to run from one end of the instrument to the other, like this. You have to go from one end of the instrument to the other. Think about 3 of those or 4 of those.
Yeah.
How do you play? How do you play with the control voltage over here and the other sound over here?
Running shoes.
Running shoes, yes, exactly, and a belly board. So we came up with it, and then Malcolm, he cooked this thing up in Woodstock. We had a couple of fake ones, which we out of cardboard to figure out what we wanted to do things, and we created that instrument, that case, and then my entire rest of my career with Malcolm together, we never stopped building the synthesizer.
It just kept going.
Yeah, it kept going. And one of the interesting things is that we put a copper cage with wires, with pipes, little tubes, copper tubes behind the fascia, and that screened out, turned into something what they call a Faraday cage.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
And it grounded
For
out
EMF.
and filtered out the RF from the radio
Yeah.
station.
So you don't get electromagnetic field and interference from radio
And then the
frequency.
other thing, which we did, which you
That's
can do
beautiful.
too, is we put in a military spec power supply, because what's really unstable in this synthesizer behind me, right, is the power supply. That's one reason why they drift. So we built a big military spec.
I have a rebuilt power supply by Rob Rosen, and it's very stable.
Yeah, we had to build that.
But I understand
It was
that.
about this high off the floor on wheels. It weighed 350 pounds.
But you kept buying new instruments to add to
Yes,
Tonto.
we did. And we did that quite on purpose.
I've never seen a mini Moog in there.
No, because the mini Moog is just the pieces of a big Moog.
So all of the Stevie Wonder records, the 4 records, the classic period of Stevie Wonder,
Right.
is there a mini Moog?
No,
There's not one mini Moog.
not one mini Moog. Just the maxi Moog.
You know, this folklore stuff, and mini Moog is one of my favorite synthesizers, but it just keeps
Because it's artful and it's analog and it allows you to touch the music. It's not so isolating. A lot of this digital stuff is isolating.
But Stevie didn't play a mini Moog on the 4 classic
No mini Moog.
records.
No.
Talking Book, Intervisions.
No.
Okay.
And we built it, and we started stuffing all
okay.
our gear into it at Electric Lady.
So how did Stevie do all that great expression?
That kind of evolved later on. It evolved out of the tail end of Electric Lady, and then moving to the West Coast.
Well, how did he get expression on the Moog then?
When we got expression on the Moog first in the normal way, sometimes one of the funniest tricks we did with Steve was to make a 12-note tone row. It went from C to F, not C, the next F, but the octave above that. So if you went from C to F in 1 octave, it was 1 octave. So all the tuning was all the notes were in the cracks of a 12-note tone row, but it was a 12-note tone row instead of an 8-note tone row. We stretched it out so there'd be notes in between the notes
Oh, and he played in the cracks?
on 1 or 2 things. But Malcolm and I
Wow.
did a lot of that with Tonto.
Why not just have a pitch wheel or something?
Well, why not have intervallic
Well, that's great.
relationship?
I mean, that's a whole other way of doing it.
Yeah, well,
It's gonna be
people
different.
say, oh, the piano's out of tune, or that's out of tune. Well, the piano is perfectly out of tune because it has a tempered scale. It's not really in
No.
tune. It's
No,
in
it's
tune
all
in all
relative.
keys because they've dealt with the fourths and the fifths and detuned them a little. Well-tempered clavier. A tempered scale is what Bach came up with to exercise that idea. But the reality was, if we could make a 12-note tone row and do it from C to, on the white notes, C to jump the next C and go to F, so it's 12 notes, right?
Yeah.
You can stretch the keyboard to do that, right? And we came up with some very different stuff by
So you
doing
did some
that.
alternate tunings, I guess,
Yes.
basically. But what about the vibrato and that sort of thing?
We added a lot of vibrato. Some of it, well, the early stuff at Media was not that much more adventuresome because it was all in the old cases. And we had, I think we bought the Mutron when we were at Electric
The
Lady.
Mutron 3?
Yeah.
That's a filter pedal, like it's an
Yeah.
envelope follower filter pedal. That's used a lot on clavinet, maybe the
Yeah.
Fender Rhodes.
The Bender that Malcolm built was a product of after our move to California.
Okay, that I want to hear about. The Bender.
You know, the problem with the keyboard instrument is pitches are fixed and the intervals are fixed.
Yeah.
And if you listen, it's hard to get soulful like that. But you take a guitar player who can
Right.
bend the fretboard and bend the keys. That's what gives the
Can
blues
bend up.
the blues. Yeah, to bend up or
Yeah.
Okay.
So what did he make?
So we wanted to be able to have that ability on the keyboard. So this is when we were in California already. We were just about settled in. We had the cases were all built. They were partially full. We had the power supply. We were working at a place called Crystal Studios. We moved out of New York. It was we had just finished, I think, tracking Music of My Mind. And
So just the first album, and then you came to the West Coast.
yeah, we entered a place called Crystal. It was an old post
In Hollywood.
office. It was a really beautiful place. All the Laurel Canyon musicians were,
Oh,
all the
sure.
hippie
The
psychedelic
70s.
70s.
Yeah.
Acoustic players were at
They
Crystal.
were all here. They were
Yeah.
all in Laurel Canyon and
Yeah.
Bronson, what is it?
It was a cult, really.
Yeah.
And, the whiskey was running full blast and all the different clubs all
Yeah.
over town. It was very alive.
Troubadour.
Yeah. And we ended up at Crystal, but we couldn't stay there. We were there for about maybe a year. It was a wonderful room. It was huge. The control room was huge. We had ample space for Tonto and all that, all the different instruments. And a lot of the players and bands who came through wanted to use Tonto as well. We were doing sessions with other players when we could. But Steve sucked up all the oxygen out of that room. And then we started working at Crystal and going back East Coast, doing stuff at Electric Lady,
But
back and forth.
That's where he made you were talking about the controller.
Yeah, but it was then finally Malcolm we had a place where we had a little lab, and Malcolm said, we got to do something about bending notes because
Yeah.
you can't play the blues if you can't bend the notes
right.
a little bit. You can't do good R&B. You can't do this kind of randomness.
needs to talk.
You need something that's impulsive. So he took a model airplane controller, which, is a little joystick, and you could fly the plane. I guess now they do it with the drones.
Yeah.
But we took the joystick, and Malcolm figured it out. We put voltage controllers inside the box of the joystick, and we
Yeah.
put rubber bands around the joystick, so
Oh,
when
for
you
the
let go of
tension.
it would snap to zero.
Yep.
And one axis was pitch, and the other axis pitch sideways, and the vertical axis was filter.
Perfect. Yeah.
And that's Stevie heard that, and Boogie on Reggae Woman is a good example of its use. But that happened at the record plant.
And that was done with a controller made from a model airplane.
yeah,
kit.
model airplane controller.
And then you can bend down, which you
you
can't
could
do
bend
on guitar.
down and up. Yeah, Steve loved it, of course, and no one had better technique and the willingness to experiment than Steve.
Well, a lot of people thought that was Mini Moog.
No mini Moog. I don't know how many times I can say it. There's no mini Moog.
Just want to be sure.
No, it was all one big instrument, and then of course we ended up at Crystal for about a year and a half.
What's up? It's Mike Dean here to say a few words about Bob. Yeah, I remember he used to pop in my room all the time, like, you know, make comments. One makes like, yeah, more 400 hertz on that clavinet, you know, like, remember he brought Quincy Jones, he brought Stevie by to meet me in my room at the Enterprise studio. I remember watching him mixing Marvin Gaye in 5.1 in like 1996 for DTS. Might have been later than that, 97 or something, but yeah, he's always been a pioneer. Always admired his work with Stevie. Great to honor him. Go.
We were really displaced because it was only one studio. And as beautiful it was, I have to say the console in that studio, I've never heard anything sound better than that console.
What kind of console?
It was built by Andrew Berliner, one of the owners of the studio. And he was an absolutely marvelous engineer. And he built a whole bunch of stuff, but the studio was one of the first consoles to have a digital fader. But the rest of it was analog, and all the equalizers had big play school size knobs on them. You could actually read it instead of having to go with a magnifying glass to diddle all these little controls like you got around
custom
here.
console.
Yeah, it was a big console. And then we stayed there for about a year, and then we got a call from Gary Kellgren, who is a partner in the record plant, and we were looking for a studio here in LA to make a home.
Yeah.
Gary knew Malcolm because before Malcolm worked at Media, where I met him,
Yeah.
he had a 6-week stint of working at the New York record plant and met Gary. So Gary invited us up to his house, and it was the old Canadian Embassy on Camino Palmero. And it looked like something out of the Charles Addams cartoons. I mean, it looked like a haunted house. It had these big pine trees in front, and it was all like kind of dark and mysterious English Tudor house. And he had Chris Stone, his partner, were there, and he invited us into the dining room to sit down to negotiate. The table maybe was about 20 feet, 18 to 20 feet long, and it had you could serve dinner for 12 people there. It was with the oak paneling and the big chandelier in the middle. It was very impressive. And so we sat down, and he said, look, I'll build a studio just the way you want it if you bring Stevie to the table for a year. And we said, this is a good idea. And so he brought out the bottle of Cavassier, and we were all standing around, stood up at the table. He picked up the pony glasses, and he filled all the pony glasses up. And we all stood up and clinked our glasses. And at the second we clinked our glasses, there was an earthquake. So you tell me that God wasn't talking to us. It even makes me emotional now.
What year?
71. I mean, I don't know what it was, but it was really kind of magical. And we drank up, and that was it. And
you guys all knew anyway. I mean, just from the very meeting, the first time, and then just the idea of just working together for a year without any deal or anything, and just so.
We never had a deal,
so
and that was part of the
diligently.
reason that we parted company 4 years later. Is we never really consummated the right deal. Everything was done verbally and by a handshake. We never really took care of business the right way.
We should talk about that later, about creative versus business and how they sort of have
I'll
to...
say this about it. Business and music, okay? There's the music business. That's the business part of music, okay? It's never been my strong suit, nor was it Malcolm's, nor did we ever really consider things business-wise. We just let things fly. We were hippies, smoking weed, making music, having a beautiful time, having a spiritual time in the studio. And we left, we thought everything would be fine, but it didn't turn out quite as we had expected. And Stevie started getting really famous, and there were a whole bunch of mugwumps and potentates coming to the studio and stuff. It started to really interfere with our flow with Steve. But I remained friends with Steve to this day. As a matter of fact, a year or two ago, I was down and did a Moog session with him, just one session, 2 years, a year and a half ago. We love each other. We accept each other. He's been more than magnanimous to me since Malcolm passed. But I can remember one of those Toys concerts he does down there at the Forum or wherever it is. And he gave us credit right on stage, and he played both Talking Book and Fulfillingness in their entirety on stage. And I actually was able My friend Dan was with me, but he actually, he finally acknowledged our contributions to his music. But that was a long time coming. Yeah, I mean, look at right now, Talking Book's over 50 years old. 50 years. Here I am still standing, barely, but I'm still here.
Well, the music's going to keep standing.
Yeah. So what happened is we went to the record plant, and we were jockeying back and forth between Crystal and New York. John Fishback and Andrew were agitating to get us to move on because he couldn't take care of anyone else at Crystal because we were there all the time, night and day. And Gary, in his wisdom, said, come on, let's do something together and we'll build you a studio. You come. And he built us that studio, and the studio was really built by two towering acousticians in the business. One was named Tom Hidley, who invented the Hidley monitors. And the other one was John Stork, who, like I say, just finished the Spotify studios and built Electric Lady.
Still going.
And we built a little studio, Malcolm, myself, Tom Hidley, and John Stork, and we built that room together. It was the only time that the two major forces in studio design in this country ever worked together. It was the first time and the last time. But that room, you couldn't make a mistake in that room. That room was perfect.
So that room is built for what you were doing with Stevie,
Right.
and Tonto. It was almost like
Tonto was in the back
fourth member.
with sliding glass doors in the back of the room. We had that, and we had the most interesting workspace. And the most interesting thing about it, which really changed the direction of my career, was the inclusion of quad monitoring, which you put quad monitors in there and an API console with quad monitors. It was at a time when we were trying to sell quad as the latest and greatest thing, and there was a system from Sansui, I think it was called QS.
Yeah.
They had the idea of putting quad in vinyl.
Sure, I bought some of those. Quadraphonic.
But it never really worked. We couldn't really get the separation, and nobody wanted to buy special cartridges and special records.
Well, you had to buy 4 speakers too.
We couldn't get it to fly. But what we could do is we could use it in the studio as a tool to enhance the ability to perform in the control room.
So you tracked in quad?
Often tracked in quad, yes.
So that if you came into the room, you could at any point isolate on it. Like you would literally put drums in one speaker?
There was a clavinet over here and a guitar over there, and you could hear them.
That is outstanding. I mean, just for all producers, calling all producers, like think about that when you're tracking, that you can just focus. You don't have to
where
sort
the
of...
musician occupied the same space as the music.
Yeah.
There wasn't the proscenium arch anymore with the three guys. Imagine the three guys standing on stage playing in front of you, and you're sitting in the third row. You're sitting in the band, and the band is in the middle of the room.
Right. But when you come in the room, and let's say that there isn't a band, and you've played everything yourself, it's like you're looking at a band, because you can like just face a speaker and kind of, it's almost like looking at the musician, and you can tell what's going on and figure your arrangement out, plan for your mix.
Yeah, how the instruments talk to each other, all of that stuff.
No one does that. That's fantastic. It's not that complicated, but it's brilliant. Yeah, well,
quad monitor section.
Robert
in
and
the Moog.
We were discussing this because the Moog is designed to be a quad output instrument.
Exactly why.
Basically for live, but the way the mixer on the Moog works is that you can take 4 inputs and then send them to any speaker you want. So I could take input 1 and send it to speaker A or B or C or D.
Or A
input
and C,
2 or any combination.
C,
or any combination.
Yeah,
but that's not a usual mixer.
No, it isn't.
So
we had an ABI console. It had a quad monitoring bus in it, a little monitoring section to the right with the buttons. You could select speakers 1, 2, 3, or 4. And we had the most marvelous Tom Hidley, the first Hidley monitor systems, which are now universal. I don't know how many studios.
Great sounding.
And they were basically at ear level and very near, just like this room, about this size. Maybe a little narrower. But they were almost at ear level. So when you were in there and you put Steve in the middle with his keyboard stack, he could hear everything coming right from different places. That's what the record plant's gift was to me, was the ability. I'd never really thought about quad at all until I got into that control room. And I realized that quad monitoring is not the same as delivering quad to somebody in a house. It was quad for home consumption was a miserable failure. And the reason was that nobody had 4 loudspeakers, and your wife, if you had a wife, say, get that subwoofer out of my fireplace. You know, they really weren't interested in high-end audio, and they didn't quite understand that for them the speakers were always high up over, mounted near the ceiling. Everyone would listen, even in the studios. Why? Because we had a big glass window, so they put the speakers up here, which is not the way God intended us to listen. They want you to listen like this.
Yeah.
Right? Our ears are designed primarily. But the thing is that I learned in that early time, fooling around with it, that this was a way to really use quad for what it really was good for, which is for performance. To be able to make the control room a musical instrument and to have a quad environment so that the musicians can occupy the same space as the music. And that was the early discovery.
If you like videos like this, please remember to comment, like, and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and it means a lot to us. Thank you.
My first quad mix was a little tiny song called Superstition, which we mixed originally in quad, and that's one of the reasons that you hear a lot of clavinets, because I was able to spread things out in quad when we were monitoring it, and Stevie could occupy the same space as the music. And that was really inspirational.
Wow.
And I think that that's where the technology started to really affect and drive the art. The technology really was driving the art, where a musician could use that performance space to really be emotive and to understand that motion and what we were doing with music living in the cloud and electronic vibrations had nothing to do with a room or a sound or a report of any kind of real-time event. Stevie's songs during that period were not about the perception of the band being in front of you in a proscenium march and they're singing to you.
Yeah.
Those records are meant to be immersive.
Right. They even are in stereo. Like you get that. It sort of comes through.
Indeed,
But I guess
do.
if you were to separate it, it would be the full intent coming across. So, and that song Superstition was written by Stevie, but then wasn't he at one point not going to do it, or what's the story on that?
You're talking about the story of Jeff Beck.
Yeah.
That was during Electric Lady time, and Jeff was in town with his band. He'd just come off a tour, and Stevie was still on the road, and Malcolm and I were mixing and recording and producing some music for Jeff Beck. And of course, Stevie came up, and when Stevie came back into town, they met each other face to face in the studio, and they were talking around, and Jeff said, well, maybe I'll play something. Steve said, if you play on my record, Looking for a Pure Love, is Jeff Beck, right?
Oh.
If you play on my record, I'll give you a song. And first off, he was going to give him Superstition, which had already been recorded, okay? We had a sort of a rough mix of it in the control room. And then the powers that be, including me and Malcolm and everyone, said, Steve, you have to do this song. You cannot give this song to anybody. But in the meantime, before that happened, they did a demo of it where Jeff Beck played the drums in the demo, but the song had already been written. And when Berry Gordy heard about that, from what we hear, and the hearsay, I guess, he said, Steve, don't do that, because that was his first #1 single. You need to keep that song for yourself. So Stevie ended up giving a beautiful song. It was written by Steve and Sarita Wright, his first wife. And the song is a beautiful song, and Jeff Beck really did justice to it. He then recorded Superstition after that, but it was after Stevie's record came out. That's really what happened.
What a talent, though. He can just back it up with another song and just say, oh, here's another great song.
He just used to write one after the other. I have no idea where it comes from in Steve's brain, but God touched him on the forehead. It might have taken his vision, but he didn't take his vision. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. The vision of Stevie is very critical and very important to me. Just backing up just a little bit, went to a very progressive high school. I graduated from high school in 1958. And I already been through the whole civil rights thing, Norman Pettus Bridge and Martin Luther King and little black girls going to school being escorted by marshals and down south with gun-toting marshals to escort this little black girl to school and stuff. And she's a pretty brave little kid. And I was very, Schwärmer got murdered. The Jewish kid went down there, he got murdered and buried with his co-workers in the irrigation canal down there. It was a pretty violent time. And I was in a school that flew the United Nations flag below the American flag. It was a high school called the Stockbridge School, 80 kids, co-educational, international, and interracial. And in very prim New England in 1958, it was like really unheard of. But I was very much into the civil rights movement. So when Steve started writing songs like Living for the City and Mr. Know-It-All and all these, Mr. Know-It-All is about Nixon. Mm-hmm. There were two black artists who really made music happen in this sort of a social context. One was Stevie and the other one was Marvin Gaye.
Both Motown artists.
Both Motown artists who really exercised their thing, didn't do exactly what Berry wanted to do, what Berry Gordy wanted to do, you know, more formula, you know, Jackson 5.
Well, how could anyone know? I mean, even with, you know, respecting Berry Gordy, like that it would be that.
He was a consummate record man.
But that the music would be that. Like no one would know that these guys would be able to write music at the level that you wouldn't think that
It was so important. It really was so important. And Malcolm and I did everything we could to, and you look at the Talking Book, and that record is really about civil rights in a lot of ways. There were songs on there that are really, you know, heavy when it comes to the real true meaning of what songwriting and good musicians should be able to do to really communicate a point of view. And Stevie's POV was my POV. I was 10 years ahead of him. Steve is 10 years younger than I am. I'm 83. He's 73 now. So when he was 21, I was 31. And he came into the studio on his 21st birthday. And he was writing stuff like this.
It's ridiculous.
But important. And his voice, we need to hear his voice now more than ever, in my opinion.
It's so mature, though, too, because it's not, the music itself isn't angry. If that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
The music is this beautiful medium because you have to be able to communicate. And
it opens the door to your brain.
It opens the door to somebody wanting to listen and say, I like that. And then the rest of it, they're able to intake the deeper part. And that's a very special talent to that. Otherwise, it's just like an angry person yelling into a microphone. It's off-putting.
Well, unfortunately, that's where music has gone. It's turned into marching music. When the backbeat left and became a tiny little tick and everything ended up on the floor, boom, 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 on every beat, it turned into marching music.
We have strong feelings about the backbeat kind of going bye-bye.
Backbeat makes the music swing. And without a real firm backbeat, the music doesn't swing. The energy goes to the kick drum on all four beats, or nearly all four beats. It really turns the music into something more militant and angry. Marching music. It's music you can put on.
Why does it do that?
Why? I have no idea. I don't know, but it's... I think that rap sort of was about anger to start with, really. And I think that sort of militancy is in the music, in the core of the music, for the most part. I mean, people don't realize it now, but during that time, when the early 80s, when that started happening, and the backbeat went away, the swing went away, and the melody ideas became very fragmented. And in many of these things, they're just grooves now. A lot of these songs are just grooves. They have no beginning and no end. It's just a loop of background noise.
Well, that's true. There is not as much beginning or end.
Right.
And there are shorter bits. So the phrases have gotten down to one beat. Like a Stevie phrase could be 8 bars.
Well, our song form is as formalized as any Beethoven string quartet or anything else. The music has a strict form. 8 bars of this, 8 bars of that, verse, chorus, and bridge. 3 sections that go on for about 2.5 to 3.5 minutes. and then they repeat themselves over and over again. It's highly formalized. Whether, producing Stevie on one hand and then doing something like Devo on the other hand, how do you know, what's the difference? There isn't a lot of difference. A few voices, 8-bar phrases, and a need to express a social condition. Remember that Devo came out of Kent State. They were at Kent State when one of Jerry Casale's friends got mowed down by somebody in the National Guard with a gun. And Jerry was there for that.
Oh, I didn't
And
know
that sort of turned his world into devolution, the undoing of society by ourselves. We're self-destructing. And that's what Devo is about. And that's as social as anything Stevie ever did. And those are the kind of bands that I really made hay with, because that was where I was coming from. Why is a pop song 3.5 minutes long? Why did we decide arbitrarily that a pop song for the radio is going to be 3 or 4 minutes, not more than 4 minutes long? You know why? We couldn't get any more music like that on a 45 or a 78. So the music, the technology, once again defined the music.
Do you think people's listening attention span had anything to do with it? Or was it a
I
coincidence?
think their attention span is now of a gnat.
It's gotten shorter.
How fast can you thumb through your phone, your TikTok or whatever it is?
Well,
blip, 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 blip. Do I get anything out of it? No, I just was entertained for a few minutes. Did you get any contact out of it? No.
Well, our level of consumption now, we could absorb 2, 3 things at once, and we want to.
You can, but you can't think about them. Because the next thing is up for you to stimulate you again before you've forgotten the last thing, and then you get at the end and you say, "What the hell happened?"
Yeah, it's true. So when Stevie went about doing these tracks, did he ever use a click track?
Rarely. I can't even remember the time we used the click track.
But maybe once, but it wasn't
a few times, like, when we needed to get through a certain section, he might use a click track. But I don't remember him using a click track ever.
Because now, if you want to compare, like we're comparing back and forth to now a click track is going to be 99.9% of the time.
Yeah, and then you're going to tune everything.
But you know what, Robert? It's going to be the very first thing that gets put down. Just think about that. Like, that is the most important thing.
Yeah, like marching music.
Militarizing. So it kind of fits what you're saying when because we said, well, we don't know. But you're literally militarizing the time as soon as you do that, and you're doing it first.
Yes.
So everything has to follow that. And there was a very interesting quote that I read on an article, and I don't know whose quote it was, but it's, you can't write a line ahead of time because until you get the sound up, you don't know how it's going to react to the other sounds.
That is us in the synthesizer with Stevie.
And I get that with synthesizers, but I'm just putting it into this context because once you put the click track down, now you can't do things.
Doomed. You can't change.
You can't do things where there isn't a click track. Like if I just want to lay back.
And the other thing is this: it's rubato. Okay, music naturally speeds up and slows down. When you're going from a verse to a chorus and you want to build up something, maybe you want the music to speed up a little bit going into the chorus, and then come down when it goes into the bridge where you have a smooth thing. You want to slow things down.
It can't happen.
Can't happen with the militancy. It's the wrong thing.
And the kick drum is essentially accenting every click.
Right.
4 on the floor is accenting every click.
And that's where music started to go south for me.
So we're punishing.
The thing with Steve's music, especially Steve's music, is the rubato. When we were first tracking at Media, we thought, we didn't know Stevie's skill on the drums, right? So we had sort of a major guy, I don't remember which guy it was, came in, Bernard Purdy, came in to try to play on one of Steve's songs. He couldn't do it.
The great Motown drummer.
Yeah, he couldn't do it.
He couldn't do it.
No, he couldn't, because the song was speeding up and slowing down, and he didn't know where it was.
Right.
Oh,
I see. But Steve
knew where it was.
Because he'd hear the song while he was playing the drums, right?
Right.
So he would put the drums down with no other parts. Is that true?
Superstition, he played the drums first.
All the way through?
All the way through.
But he knew the song.
Twice.
He knew what the song was.
Yes.
And you guys knew, did you guys know the song?
No, had no idea.
You just listening to him put this thing down
He said, let's make a funky bass sound. That was the first thing out of his mouth. He says, drums are done now. The drum's interesting too because I'll explain this, but I don't want this to become a biblical here. We're really going left and right in a lot of different directions.
I'm very interested in how the tracks went down.
Okay, well, the drums are very interesting because they're called the drums. It has an S on the end. It's not the drum.
No.
It's the drums, okay? So how do you give a blind man to know where all the drums are when he's sitting down behind the drum kit? And incidentally, the only person that really hears the drums in stereo is the player. So if you listen to the Stevie Wonder records and a lot of my other records, you'll hear that the hi-hat comes up on the left because the drums are recorded from the point of view of the player. Not, you walk 10 feet away from the drum kit, it's mono. You're listening to mono. Yeah. All the waveforms are mixed together, right? The only person who really hears the drums in the defined stereo or quad setup is the player.
Yeah.
When we recorded and tracked with Stevie, we made sure that the drum track is in the headphones, was in stereo from his POV, so that sonically, when he was listening on the headphones, he knew where to place the drums. It wasn't a mono signal coming down, and you just heard where they.
That would be really confusing if he's playing the hi-hat on the left side and he's hearing it in his headphones on the right.
Right, or even in the middle. So what we tried to do is we tried to create the image. You listen to our piano recordings during that time too. You'll hear the lower voices over here, and upper voices over here.
So your cue mixes are just real life.
Yeah. So the instruments that are acoustical on our records are not all synthesizer. They're really a mix of live instruments from the POV of the player to electronica, which really happen in space and don't ever have a live anything to them. They've never been performed live, and they don't exist in the real world.
This is amazing to hear. And then, was there music? Was there ever any written music?
No. How can Stevie write music down unless Gene Keys or somebody?
You guys can.
Yeah, but Malcolm more than me. He's more the player than I'm more the programmer. But but we never wrote it down. It was never written down. And when Steve had other people in the studio, they did head charts.
So you had no screens to look at.
No.
And no memory. Because every time you wanted to make a new sound, so he would just play the bass sound, then it's gone. And then you'd say, well, now what was it like? Now what are we going to put on?
Yeah, we need a voice. We need this. We need that. Sometimes he would do a guide vocal and a Rhodes part, or a piano part. And it was one of his I think Sarita or one of his later girlfriends would sit on the piano bench next to him, and he'd have a RE. We always used an RE20, so we didn't have any hand noise. He could touch the mic and know where he was. Right, it was a really nice present mic, and he would play the piano, and Lonnie would sing, give him the voice, the lyrics in his head. She'd whisper in his ear while he was tracking. We used to, if you listen to a lot of those early records with me and Malcolm, you could hear Malcolm giving Stevie the lyrics one bar ahead of where he was singing.
Really? You could hear you guys?
Yeah, you could hear a little bleed in some of the new naked tracks.
And so the tracks...
How could he memorize all the lyrics to hundreds of songs?
No, I mean, people would read them, so he's not reading them.
It was a very interesting melding of reality and fantasy.
And you were all working together, but the fact that you had no
music
recall...
in my mind, it was just the three of us in the studio, with the exception of one guitar part, Buzzy Featon. But as time went on, he became more liver and liver.
But when you were working with the three of you, it was all hands on deck, right? Like you could have
absolutely
6 hands on the Moog. What about mixing? Was everybody
mixing? We had a technique, we called it Armstrong automation. That's because we did everything by hand, and it was Malcolm, Steve, and me at the board, and we would rehearse everything very carefully
and just do run throughs and
yes.
So he was like hands-on mixing with you guys.
Totally, and he's so good at it.
So much fun.
Yeah, I just had to put his hand on the knob. Once it's there, he knew where he wanted to do it.
Well, sure, and then you guys are all talking together and responding and say, hey, when we get here, you do this because I'm going to do that. And that's real automation. I mean, it's spontaneity.
Yeah, don't touch that knob. It's more than me job's worth. We had to leave stuff on the console overnight and stuff. We can't have to, sometimes we'd do something, we'd go out of the studio, oh man, that's fantastic. And we come back the next day, we have a big piece of masking tape. Don't touch this console
Well,
with
just
your
in
life.
case.
And
Yeah.
we pull off the tape and we listen to it, and it was terrible.
Well, that's going to happen.
Yeah. So then, we had to do stuff the next day with fresh ears. But I spent my life in the studio. It was Stevie time. There was no, normal sessions. It was 7 o'clock at night until the sun came up.
And then you sleep in the day, but you guys work.
Sleep in the day, get up around 4 o'clock, go into the studio and do it again.
Why at night? What was the...
I have no idea. Stevie still works all at nighttime.
He likes working late
It's
at night.
It's his clock. And I think he's entitled to do whatever the he wants. He's earned that for sure. He's a marvelous, incredible human being. And I have deep respect and love for him.
I can tell, and you have like deep, mutually shared experience. It's more than music.
It's about the social condition, and that's what the great thing about his art is. It's not just 4 minutes of jiggling around on the floor and feel good and work up a little sweat onto the next tune. Steve's songs, and also others like Marvin Gaye, like I say, have real issues with the social condition, just like Devo. Devo, when I saw them, it was really the first time I saw them at the Starwood one night, but they came to me because of my past with Steve, obviously, a part of it. But they too were about the social condition. But what did they do to the 8 bars? 8 bars of music? Stevie was doing 8 bars of music of this, that, and the other, and so were they. So what's so different about those simple voicings, nothing too complicated, no waterfalls, just simple instruments close together. Devo was sort of a monster's head on an R&B body. It was really a bottom-end R&B, I made sure of that. But then they went somewhere else, but they were talking about the social condition. It's a very, very important part of what music has brought to the table in terms of our social awareness. And I think that we've been sort of faked out by the media. We become totally stricken, and I say that by the watch the moving, bouncing ball and not listen to the content as much. And I think that really is a part of the problem. I think there's an underlying group of musicians and players today who are not really being heard as much. The whole era of a record company having an A&R department, like a John Hammond, for example, who is like one of the great, or Clive Davis, or the folks over at Atlantic. Those people took artists, and if it took 6 albums to get them to really hit on, they would hothouse their artists and get them to move forward and to evolve and to develop their art. And now you go to a record company, all they want to know is how many clicks do you have? That's not being an A&R person. That's not finding a talent and hothousing. Would Bob Dylan survive in today's environment if he hadn't had this powerful past of emotional songs with powerful songwriting? No. He would never survive it.
Do you think any of the artists would? Would it transcend Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder?
I think for me, I know where I experienced it, where I touched the sun. But I don't know if other people are touching the sun right now. I feel a little estranged by it. But then again, I'm supposed to. I'm 83 years old. I'm a fucking antique, But I know what it's like when it's right. And that has nothing to do with age, It has to do with inhabiting the technology that comes down the pike and figuring out how to use it. Like AI, for example. Now we have people who are called prompt engineers who simply know how to talk to the computer. My housemate, for example, is Italian, and she talks to the AI in Italian and gets a totally different kind of imagery out of the computer than if she says it in English. Okay? It's a new world with new paintbrushes, and we got to learn how to understand it a little bit better and not fear it, and we've got to use it more creatively. and to understand it. Right now, it's busy imitating the past, because after all, AI is not sentient. It's not really thinking. It takes its information from what it's been taught from the past, but it doesn't future think. It thinks backwards.
Yeah.
So there are limitations in terms of how to use it creatively, but these guys around here are hovering around us right now, making our film right now. We'll find how to make music with AI that means something. It's up to the next generation of young people to really understand the new art form. I'm a creature of the past. And
well, the age doesn't even matter as much to me, because time was always the one that's going to tell us the truth. And if the songs last, that tells you.
yeah.
So if today's songs continue and last, I mean, we know that the songs that you were associated with have continued to last. You know, they've exceeded.
Because it's good songwriting.
Yeah, and we don't know right now, like with the songs that are out there, and certainly with AI, we have no clue if it's going to add to music or not. But it's incumbent upon the people using it to learn from the past, and because you know, you don't want to. If you don't learn from the past, you're going to learn the hard way. You know, you can do trial and error.
Yeah, but you always learn the hard way.
Well, you can learn the hard way, or you can read a book, or you can talk to someone like you who could give you a few tips, and you're still going to make it your own. But if I don't talk to someone like you, and I'm just going to throw myself in, I could get myself killed. Like, I'm not going to get myself killed in music, but if I'm doing mountain climbing, I don't want to learn the hard way. I want to talk to a person that's been climbing for a long time.
Yes, indeed.
You know what I'm saying? I'm using that analogy. And I think that's where we are with moving into the next level of AI. We want to take the interesting lessons from the past, because human emotion didn't suddenly change in 2023. It's changing slowly, and we're changing to the music and to the art forms that are out there. But essentially, our human rate of change is the same. We're changing, but we don't just suddenly change because the technology comes out.
Music, I think, music is the most plastic in the sense of being able to be tuned. And I don't consider it plastic cheapness. I say plasticity is what we do, how we turn things inside of a sound, for example, is where we have a higher degree of having the ability of that kind of plasticity.
Absolutely. That's like back to the monophonic versus polyphonic. When a human lays one line down at a time and nuances them like a string quartet would, that's not the same as a synthesist coming in and just block chording it.
Yeah, block chording is a pianistic effect. And when you try to use a keyboard to play sounds that are not pianistic, it destroys the intent of the sound. T.O.N.T.O, for example, one sound, one keyboard, one sound, one note, one event. That note can have a lot of things going on inside of it.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. It could be a sequenced line doing multiple things, but it's one line. If you listen to Steve's records or even Devo, it's one line. When musicians play, it's not 10,000 guitar overdubs. It's one line. It's a bass line. Everyone plays together. When we were doing Devo with the quad monitoring in the studio.
You use quad monitoring for Devo?
Of course. Well, what I learned from Stevie, I'm not going to apply in my next.
Well, that's why I want us to apply what we were learning from you.
Well, you got quad monitors in here. Get to work.
I will get to work.
I think we're in a really interesting time. I only hope I live long enough to see what comes out the other side of it. Well, where the change is when I kick the bucket. But it's a marvelous thing what we're doing. And the interesting thing about music is it's invisible. You can't see it, you can't touch it, and if you hit the off switch, it goes away. Well, it's totally invisible.
We're moving into new areas of immersive sound, which is something that you've been kicking the door at for a while.
Yes.
What do you think that's going to do?
Well, I think that, like take, for example, a drum kit. When you take a drum kit, for example, and you record it in stereo, and you do a tom fill, it goes around the room like this, right? You hear that move in your record. That move itself, that motion itself is musical. It has a musical effect. So motion is something that when we invented recording, we couldn't store electrically. So we got rid of it. We had mono. Everything was in the middle, no matter what the instrument was.
Yeah.
And then we had stereo, and then we got into the movie theater, and things got a little bit wider and stuff. But we were never really able to think about a recording of the instruments. Now, a symphony orchestra has motion because the violins are over here, the cellos are over there, the horns are over here, the string bass, basso here, violas, all in sections. And who hears all of that kind of stereo fullness and the motion? The conductor hears that. The conductor plays the orchestra, right? When we go into the studio and we're manipulating stuff that's electronic and acoustic and melding those together, we are creating a space that's in motion. We've never been able to store it properly. We store it sort of electrically in stereo. But now with things like Dolby Atmos and there are other systems that are even more interesting than Dolby Atmos, okay? When we store that information, we can take advantage of storing spatial motion electrically, which is something we could never do. And now that we're doing it, now we should be using it properly. It's okay to take a record like Whip It or something, or Superstition from Stevie that's 50 years old and was really conceived, although I used quad in the studio,
right,
to have it, and then to listen to it again where there is where you can actually have the motion of the music. That motion is as musical as any other part of the recording. And the gift we have now is that we can store it and play it back. So new music should be really not conceived in stereo like my old recordings. That's all we had. But when Stevie sits down, or Jerry Casale, or Mark Mothersbaugh, anyone, Taylor Swift sits down to work on a song, they can, in the production, they can think about now creating the motion as well as the notes and the duration and the poetry.
What you've said often is the technology will drive them to another place.
Yes.
Creative place.
It's another instrument. This whole room is a musical instrument, and we simply inhabit it. That's the truth. We're in a very interesting time right now. I wish I was your age, like 20. That would be great.
But
if I only knew now what I know, whatever then, now, or whatever it means, me being in a 20-year-old body
that
would be very
terribly out of
interesting.
balance.
I'd be a terrorist, I tell you.
It would be terribly out of balance.
Yeah.
We're just not, if we had all our wishes, you wonder if things would be better.
I hope to hell they are. I mean, I really just see people fighting and being divided. They're being divided by their politics, by their religion, by class, by money, and everything else. And underneath it all, we're all people. We're all human beings. And that's what we lose sight of.
And music speaks to all of it.
Everybody.
Because it doesn't matter any of that. It doesn't care. And it communicates to all of it. Like you can understand it. You get a different point of view, I guess, on it, depending on where you're coming from, but not that different. That's like such a remarkable thing about music.
Yeah, and you can listen to different music from different cultures. Like you listen to music that's really native to Japan. There's a very interesting guy, his name is Sean Olive. He's a doctor of science. He is the chief researcher at Harman. And he did some really interesting studies about defining the standards in headphones. Because if your headphones don't deliver the same frequency response as another brand of headphones, or in the room, then how do you present your music electrically, sonically, if you don't predict what the end playback?
It's always different. The room is different. The headphones are different.
But the thing is, he's worked very hard over the years to actually standardize a curve for headphones, just as much as we have an RIAA curve or a monitoring curve for a room, so that like in the days of big theatrical films, they could move the film from one theater to another and know that the monitoring system will produce the same effect from theater to theater. We need earphones that are also set to a standard so that whatever we do in the studio is going to sound the same, that we're going to deliver the experience that our artist wants to hear and know and understand. So developing curves and performance curves are important, but you listen to stuff, the music made in Japan, right? Culturally, they listen to different things than we do.
Very different frequency ranges
Yeah,
appeal
they
to
like
them too.
high, tinkly
Yeah,
music.
not as much low.
Yeah, they got low later when they started hearing American music. You know, so yeah, you go to Dagestan, or you go to Poland, or you go to India, you hear a totally different thing. The only thing that's common is that it's music.
Yeah, but to me they're like as inconsequential as spices. It's like there's food, and that's the important thing. There's nutrition in the music, and you're going to get
Exactly.
it. You're going to get the spice of India and the spice of Japan, and the United States is going to have a flair to it. But in the end, the value, the intrinsic value of the music transcends all of it. You know, and it's interesting to note all these things.
Yes,
but that's
exactly
what
right.
drives me.
Yeah,
is
that's
that we
exactly
can
right.
all communicate, and we can get past all of this sort of. It's almost like nonsense. You know, music is the intangible thing, and that's supposed
Like
to be.
I say, it's invisible.
But that's supposed to be the nonsense. But really, like the tangible stuff that's going on these days is really more of the nonsense, because no one's going to care.
People are trying to attach visual content to music that doesn't really need to have visual content. And they're a slave to looking at a screen. Just like Pro Tools. You know, you look at Pro Tools and all of a sudden you're translating your music into some sort of arbitrary picture.
Well, you're watching waveforms. But
Yeah.
what the bigger picture for me though is like if you go to like ancient Rome or ancient Greece, what do you want to see? You want to see the art. Because that transcended all the political battles
And the warfare.
and the wars. And that's what I'm saying. Now we have this music, and so, you know, and the technology to deliver
I
it.
just hope we have artists who are powerful enough to project a positive image and not always look at the negative stuff.
Well, they're going to hear your story because it's really inspiring to hear how, you know, the three of you came together and you were able
like
to
we
take
say,
Stevie's talent and do something that Motown wasn't doing.
You know, it was, I like to say, it was like a night sky and three comets come together out of the blue and they all cross, and there's this brilliant flash where all these comets hit at the same time. It was a brilliant flash, and then it's gone. And that really is the story, my story, with Steve and Malcolm, for sure. We were together only almost 5 years, and look at what we did.
Yeah.
Never to be repeated.
And it burned so bright. You guys definitely gave it all the power during that time. I can
That's
tell
right.
from hearing from this interview, it was everything in your life during that period of time.
Yeah, I lived and ate and breathed music. It was totally, I didn't know whether I was coming or going.
There was a gift that came to you, and then you were able to take that, and we have it now.
It stood the
We all
test
get
of
it.
time. And that's really what's the most important thing.
Well, thank you for
You're
that.
very welcome,
and for
young
sharing,
man, as they say.
and for sharing this with everyone. I mean, it's been to get this story from you in this all-encompassing kind of way. You know, it's very special to me, and hopefully, you know, everyone that's going to check it out.
I want to just make sure that it gets out there in some legible form, and you seem to have hit the nail on the head with your programming, and I'm very happy to be a part of it.
Thank you. Well, we're privileged, and hopefully more to come. We'll see you soon.
I want to play with one of these.
We'll get you back in gear.
Yeah, I mean, it's really been a long time since I've touched one of these. I touched one last year with Steve, but it wasn't the same. It really wasn't.
Yeah.
I felt estranged. Thing wouldn't stay in tune till the very end. I was ready to give up. And I said, let's try it once more. The synthesizer been on for 2 or 3 hours. And then it suddenly decided it was happy being in tune.
You have to get to know each other. You need to spend some
You
quiet
need to
time.
get a good, solid power supply and really put a Faraday cage behind it that was not affected by RF, because they are affected by RF, and ground it out. I always like to say, we used to have water-powered instruments, you know. Just kidding.
This has been
Anyway.
amazing. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Very welcome indeed. Such a blabbermouth.